But welcome on this beautiful day to Beekeeping 101. We have Chef Simon at the Franklin Garden, standing right next to one of the 3 beehives that are at that site. So as people come in, please use the chat function to put in your name and your group and your email. And then any questions that you have as we go along, please share them in chat, and I will be asking Chef Simon the questions as they come in. So don't hesitate to ask any questions as we go along, and then we'll also have some time at the end for any additional questions. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Chef Simon to tell us all about beekeeping.
Good morning, and welcome to the Franklin Permaculture Garden. It is a beautiful day. It does get a little bit warm in here, but it's cool enough right now that I'm not going to get too hot. We're going to be looking at well, this hive in particular. I'm not quite sure what we're going to find. I mean, obviously, we're going to find a lot of bees, but I'm not quite sure. We had a swarm here the other day, and I don't know if it was this hive that swarmed. So we might find a queen in here, but we might not. And if that's the case, I'm going to look in the hive next to it, and we'll take a look in there. I'm just going to sort of go through the basics of some beekeeping as we go through this. This hive that we've got right here, this has been pretty much our most successful hive to date. It's been here from the very get-go, and it's produced the most honey. We got about 50 pounds of honey all told last year. The majority of it, not all of it, but the majority of it from this hive. And if anybody was fortunate enough to taste any of that, it was very good. I was just saying to Tyler, who's shooting this, there were very sort of few bees flying around here when we first walked over, but since I've been stood here for the past 5 minutes or so, I'm being surrounded by more and more bees. They are very definitely checking me out. Word has gone out into the hive that there's a big white blob stood next to it, and they are certainly checking us out right now. They want to know what's going on. So anyway, we're going to get into this. Like I say, as we go through, if you've got any questions, please do not hesitate, ask away, and Kathy will relay those questions as we go along. All right. So each beehive has certain integral parts to it. This is a telescopic lid that I'm just going to of bees already at the top. This looks like a pretty healthy hive. You'll find this a lot. The sticky stuff that was holding the lid down, this is propolis. The bees make this from tree resins, and they like to put it, well, everywhere. But they certainly like to fill in lots of gaps where they don't want cold air or water or anything like that getting into the hive. And propolis is great for that. It's sticky. It sticks to everything. And so it becomes a little difficult sometimes to deal with, but it actually has some pretty good healing properties. You can use it as an antiseptic if you collect enough of it. It's actually good for cuts and burns, things like that. This is the inner lid that I'm going to prise off right now. It has a little slit in it here. You can see it's like an upper entrance for the bees that they'll use it. It's also good for ventilation. Just going to lift that off. You'll see we've got some more bees there, and they've built a little bit of comb here to try and stick the lid to the top there, and of course there's lots more propolis around the outside. Just going to drop that down. And then
Simon,
we're into this.
what are you using to pry that open with?
Oh, this is a Hive Tool. They're basically indestructible. They're pieces of steel that are really quite sharp at one end You can pretty much lever everything up with this. I usually end up buying a lot of these because when you're working in a bee yard, you always end up putting it down, forgetting where you put it, and you always need about 4 or 5 with it. And they come in different styles, but I kind of like this style of Hive Tool. It works really well for levering things open. So as we've opened this up, I really haven't used that much smoke on this. You can see all these bees lining up. Trust me, they're checking me out. They want to look at me as much as I want to look at them. They're all interested in what I'm doing. They all line up right along the top here. You can see them right here as well. These are all females right here. There are 3 types of bees that are in the queen, and we'll get into detail there a little bit as we go along. But I won't find the queen in this top box right here because I put a queen excluder on, which you'll see in just a moment, will prevent her from getting into this box. So that I don't want her laying eggs in here. This is what I want, where I want them to just store honey, which when I start pulling these out, we'll be able to see. I haven't been in this hive actually in it's nearly 2 weeks now. You can see they've gummed everything up nicely with propolis. All right. So very slowly, very gently, because I don't want to damage any of the bees that are in here. I'm just going to pull this out. And what am I looking at? Well, I don't know, can you see that glistening there? That is all honey. It's not capped honey. It's not ready to eat yet, but it is all honey that they are removing the moisture from. Same on the other side there. This guy right here, that's a male bee. You see he's a lot bigger than the females that he's next to, okay? You can tell the males, first of all, they're a lot chunkier, but they got a bigger set of eyes as well. Their eyes are really large. See, this one's eating honey right now. She's got her head right in the cell. She's eating away. I put a little bit of smoke in there. The smoke sort of distracts them a little bit, makes them more interested in eating and what have you than it does in me, which is a good thing.
Tyler, could you get one more closer shot of the... Great.
So I'm just looking right now just to see and it looks pretty good right now. It's still fairly early on in the season, yet they're filling this one up nicely. And oh, if you're quick, you can see a bee being born here. This is a male bee that's eating its way out of its cell. I don't know if you can see that, but that's kind of cool. It will emerge very shortly. The first things that that any newborn bee does is once it climbs out of there, it will beg to be fed from other bees. And the males in particular are quite interesting. They can't even feed themselves. They have to be fed by the female bees. They don't do anything but eat and procreate, and that is their job. That's their task. That's all they're designed to do. They only get to procreate once. After that, they die. Each male will live approximately 55 days or thereabouts. And certainly as they get close to the winter time, the female bees will just kick them out of the hive because they're just a drain on the resources. They're not really useful for anything in the winter time. You see this guy struggling to get out. Here he comes. We got lucky on this one. This is great. It takes from egg to being born. This egg was laid 24 days ago. It takes 24 days to produce a male bee. It takes 21 to produce a female. There he is. Look at that, right there. and it takes 16 to produce a queen. Very cool. All right. All right, so I'm just going to drop these back in there. Their honey production looks pretty good. And there's going to be no eggs in here, like I say, because I put the queen excluder on. So their honey production is good. I've got a male bee buzzing around me quite a bit right now, and the male bees are very good. They're very loud. Their buzz is very, very loud. But male bees don't have a stinger. They are male bees are known as haploids. They don't have a father. They do have a grandfather, but they don't have a father. All right, so you can see the queen excluder here, and the workers and the males can get through, but the queen cannot fit through these bars. She's too big to do that. So I'm just going to pull this off so we can get further down and see if we've got any brood at all. All right, let's take a look here. This looks like a very healthy hive right now. And it's fairly calm. It's not doing too bad at all. I just want to move some of these bees out of the way, and so this is how they're going to react to the smoke. They all run back inside. You see, it's all clear now. They all run back inside, which gives me a little bit more space and time to work. Let this one out, and let's see what we find here. They've certainly drawn out comb. But it's the comb on this is a little bit shallow, so I'm going to need to go a little bit further into the center. Okay, so
Chef
here you can
Simon,
see
we have a quick question here. What kind of wood do you use to smoke them?
it's a mixture of cotton fibers and paper with sort of there are little bits of wood chips mixed in there, but mostly it's just compressed cotton fiber and paper, and it burns really slowly but produces good smoke, and the bees actually seem to kind of like it.
Great. Can you talk a little bit more about what you use as the smoker, and and maybe a little bit about your protective gear?
Sure. Well, like I say, it's it's just compressed fibers and paper. So, like I say, it burns very slowly, but produces a not unpleasant smoke. I can use some burlap as well, and indeed you can use pine needles and things like that if you want to produce some really good smoke. But they do sometimes produce some resin there that will kind of clog up the inside of the smoke. So you've got to be careful about that. And then this is just a cotton jacket. It's not bee sting proof, but it certainly will protect you for the most part. And of course the veil just stops them flying into your face, which can be irritating. Again, it's not 100%. I got a bee inside my suit last week, and it stung me on a very delicate part of the arm. I knew it was coming. I could feel her inside there, and I knew as soon as I moved my arm, she was going to get upset, and she did. And it gets a bit sore. But you put some white vinegar on there, that'll help take the sting away.
Great, thank you.
This pie crust looking stuff here, this is all brood. This is all capped brood. So this is about to be babies. And if you see here, you can see the white glistening larvae. Okay, that's what it looks like before it's capped. And what I'm really looking for at the bottom of the cells is what appear to be sort of little white grains of rice. They're very tiny, but they're eggs. I don't see any yet on this one, but that's not necessarily that unusual. Okay, so right here, this is a queen cell, and it's fairly high up on the comb itself. And I'm actually going to remove it, just very gently remove that, because inside of there will be a queen, and I don't want there to be a queen. So I'm going to destroy that. That's not something that I want to see, because they'll end up swarming from that. And I don't want to see that. So,
can you talk a little bit about why they swarm?
well, now if I knew the full true answer to that, I would be a very rich man. But they swarm for a couple of reasons. Swarming is actually very natural for them to do. It's a way for them to continue to reproduce and enlargen the population. But oftentimes they'll swarm because they're starting to run out of room inside the hive, which isn't a good thing. If they need more living space, they'll swarm because they need to go somewhere. They need to go somewhere bigger. And so it's it's important for them to have that space. So swarming is just a natural occurrence for bees, and they'll do it frequently. And so here we see there's a swarm cell here that I need to remove. Again, because I don't want a queen forming. There's another one here.
So we have another question, Chef Simon. Can you explain the marked rotating colors on queen bees?
Yes. So for each year that a queen is born, it makes her a little bit easier to identify. You find a little dot on her back, and they'll use a different color depending on what the end number is for the year. This year, I believe it's blue, but don't quote me on that. And certainly the queen in here will not be marked. She won't be a marked queen for definite. Just in case you're wondering, by the way, occasionally when I need to move the bees from the comb that I'm looking at, instead of using the smoke, which I don't like to use too much of, I'll end up just blowing on the bees, and they don't like it, so they move out of the way. With this one here, you see there's lots of brood. There's just tons of brood over here. But if I want to see down into the bottoms of these cells, I'll just blow on it and they'll move aside for me, so I can actually start to see down in there. And I'm looking for eggs.
How often do you have to check the hives for the queens?
During the height of the summer, I'll usually go about 10 days between each check. I held off a little bit on this one just because I knew I was coming here today to do this. But yeah, normally around about 10 days, every 10 days, I'll go in and check and see what I can find. But
And
there can only be one.
You've already found 3. Is that unusual, or is that pretty typical?
For the queen cells, this time of year, that's not unusual at all. It's very, very typical, because if they sometimes they'll just produce swarm cells just in case they need to produce a new queen, they'll start producing swarm cells. But for the most part, they won't unless they are looking at swarming. You see these bees here, they're very calm. I mean, they're just sat right on the comb there. They're not really moving that much. You can see the difference in the, I don't know, can you pick that up? The difference in these this bee right here was just born. She's much lighter than the one that she stood next to. The first job that they have when they emerge is to be a nurse bee. So they'll clean out the cell from which they were born, and then they'll start feeding other eggs that have been laid. That's their first job. Eventually, they'll end up graduating to guard bees. That would be the bees that sit right at the very entrance to the hive. So put that there. Access. There we go. And then eventually they'll graduate from there. They'll graduate to foraging and go out and fly. But the guard bees are the ones that end up sort of guarding the front entrance and making sure that intruders like me don't get in and out quite so easily. So I don't see too many eggs in here. Certainly there's plenty of capped brood, but I want to make sure that we do still have a queen in here that's going to be laying, to make sure that we make it through the season. During the height of the season, a worker bee will work herself to death, and she'll last maybe only, 3 weeks or so. But over the winter, the bees over the winter will last maybe 3 or 4 months. Still don't see any eggs, but again, like you can see, they're very calm. They're not really doing much of anything. They're just kind of hanging out, which is great. It makes it very comfortable for me to go through the process of seeing what's happening. I don't see any eggs there. It may be that if this is the hive that did in fact swarm, it may be that that the queen has only just taken her mating flight and hasn't yet caught up with with laying more eggs. But there is still some brood in here, which is good. So I'm going to put this one back and go down to the next level. You'll see that the frames here, these are also quite small. This is also a honey, what we call a honey super. That's the name of the box that they're in. It's called a honey super. But the next one down is a brood chamber, and I'm hoping to find a lot more brood in there and eggs as well. So let's put this one back together, and we'll go down to the next box.
That one is 3 boxes high, right?
It's actually 4. This one. Okay, so straight away I'm seeing.
Is that pretty typical, or should you start, like if you were going to just start doing this, would you start with 1 or 2?
Yeah. If you're going to start doing this, you pretty much start with just 1, and then work your way through, and just add more boxes as you as you need. As the colony grows and needs more space, you just work your way through that.
Great.
So I do see some queen cells on this. Lots of brood. That's all brood that you can see right there in the center. And there's plenty of uncapped brood in this as well. Still don't see any signs of eggs. And I'm looking as well, now that we've gotten down into the main body of the hive here, I'm actually looking for the queen as well to see if I can find her. It would be great if we could see her. Make me feel, and there's plenty of brood, as you can see on this side also. It just depends if this is the hive that swarmed or not. And again, I've no way of telling that right now. But because I'm not seeing any evidence of eggs right now, I see lots of larvae and I see lots of capped brood. But because I'm not seeing any eggs, I have a feeling that this might be the one that swarmed. But again, we'll see. Time will tell. If anybody certainly is interested in getting into beekeeping, you know, it's a nice hobby to have, but chances are it will take over a certain part of your life if you're not careful. Yeah, ask my wife that, and she'll certainly tell you that it will.
Chef Simon, how many hives do you have at your house?
I've got 3 at my house. I started this season, well, actually, so in the winter time, there were, I had 2, and so things were going fairly well. But I lost one during the winter, and so before one of my hives swarmed, I took the queen from it and started a second hive, and then the hive that I was trying to prevent swarming, it swarmed anyway, and so I captured that swarm, and that's at my sister-in-law's house, who's right across the street. So I've now got 3 again, which is what I had last year, and they all seem to be doing very well right now. So, and then we've got 6 here at UMass. So right now I'm managing 9, which is a lot of work, but that's what happens. You start a hobby and then it takes off, and if things are going really well, it, like I say, it does sort of tend to take over your life a little bit. Again, I see plenty of brood and plenty of uncapped brood. As of right now, no eggs. These this is all capped brood right here, and then these at the top, these are all drone brood. This is all going to be male brood. You see, it's a lot bigger. It needs to be, because the drones are just so much bigger than the females. So all these bees, of course, are related. You know, there's one queen, and these are all either her sons or daughters. And when a new queen emerges, she will, after she's killed all the other queens that are available, she will take a mating flight, and she'll go and mate with other males that aren't her sons, about 300 feet in the air somewhere, wherever it is that they're mating. And then she'll never leave the hive again unless they swarm. And her one task at that point then is to just lay eggs and create more brood. At the height of the summer, she'll be laying about 2,000 eggs a day. So she ends up being very busy, and she determines what kind of an egg she's going to lay. So if she wants a worker bee, she'll lay a female. If she wants male bees, she'll lay a male. But she determines what's going to be laid, and helps to control the population.
Wow. So the bees are able to survive the New England winters, or do you have to do anything special to get them ready for winter?
The bees that we have, they're a Carniolan Russian mix, so they're actually fairly hardy. But I usually wrap the hives. I'm sure some people have seen. I usually wrap the hives in a black sort of insulated jacket, and it just helps to keep a lot of the heat in the hive. The interior of the hive, even during the winter, is a constant 96 degrees. Because they need it that warm to protect the brood that they're rearing, and to keep themselves warm. And so they purposely shiver to keep themselves warm. And as they do that, they'll move from the outside of the cluster to the inside of the cluster, so that they're constantly rotating the whole time, keeping themselves as warm as possible. Again, you see here tons of brood, lots of brood. This is all capped brood. It looks great. I still haven't seen any eggs though, which is a bit of a concern. I've got a couple of queen cells here that I'm actually going to leave, because I suspect now that I've gotten this far into this hive, I suspect that it was this hive that did in fact swarm, and that means that the queen has already left, and there aren't any. See, there's a couple of queen cells at the bottom here as well. It means that there is no more there are no more eggs being laid, which is a concern. You can see on here there's a lot of male bees on here. That's because there's a lot of food on here. This stuff that you see in the center of this is called bee bread, which is basically just pollen. It's their main protein source, and so they collect pollen and they store it in the cells here. You see there's some honey up on this edge here, and along the top along here there's little bits of honey, but there's a lot of food on this, and so the males are hanging out here because this is where they eat. And there's a couple more queen cells here that I'm going to leave, but they're not actually complete. This one in particular hasn't been sealed yet. But we'll see when we get down into the next one as well. If I do find a queen in here, I will go back and I'll destroy these queen cells, because I don't want them. I don't want them swarming. Certainly, if you decide to keep bees at home, you need to. It's a good idea to always check with your neighbors. They might not be happy with you keeping bees. Some people are quite concerned about it, so you need to bear that in mind. Although usually and quite literally, a couple of jars of honey work very well as a bit of a sweetener. I'm just going to drop this one back in here. I'm going to lift this box off, and we're going to go into the bottom brood chamber and see what we can find in there.
Is there a special technique to get them back into the hive without, or you're just not concerned about the bees will just move out of the way?
Oh, you mean these on the top right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they're fairly compliant. They'll just move out of the way as and when we need. Let's see what we've got going on here. Eventually, they will end up getting somewhat irritated, and their displeasure known. But at least for right now, they're fairly compliant. They're nice and calm. Yeah, you see, there's not a lot going on this one. There's a little bit of bee bread. There are certainly no eggs. It's sometimes quite easy to mistake a drone for the queen. I actually nearly just did it then. I nearly said, "Oh, I found the queen," and then realized no, that it was a drone. So it is quite easy to sort of mix the two up.
We have a question about native plants that attract bees.
Good question. Always a good idea to plant your garden with plenty of native plants that will attract honeybees. Borage is a great plant that the bees will really like, and it's quite pretty as borage. It's, you know, like, it's quite nice. In my garden, I've planted. They really like the coreopsis. They like some Shasta daisies. They like mint. They go for some helianthus, which is a nice sort of tall yellow yellow flower. Russian sage, they absolutely adore. They're all over the Russian sage, and that flower is a little bit later on in the season as well. So sort of like more sort of August and September time, that they're really into the Russian sage. Just gotta be careful with the Russian sage because it spreads everywhere. But it really is good, and the bees certainly do like it. So any of those, the coreopsis is nice, got a nice sort of small 5-petal golden flower that they really seem to like. And like I say, Shasta daisies they're into as well. I got a lot of those in my garden. Foxgloves they seem to like. And these are all good questions actually to ask at you know, at your local garden centre. The people that have the garden centre are great for information like that as well. You should feel very comfortable in asking them there about that, because they're always really helpful.
Great. We'll include a list in follow-up resources. That was a
Cool.
great question. Yeah.
We do have plenty of brood on this one. This is actually a good sign that we've got brood this far down. I was thinking about having to maybe switch a couple of the boxes around to encourage them to build brood further down, but in fact there's quite a lot here. And again, you can see that they're just hanging out. They're not really moving that much at all. They're fairly quiet. They're a little bit sleepy this morning. You'll see occasionally they'll be doing this little sort of shake. I don't know if you can see that, but oftentimes they'll do this little wiggle dance. A bee coming back into the hive will do a wiggle dance, and if she gets enough of the other bees around her to follow her lead, it's telling the other bees where they think there's a good source of nectar.
Interesting.
It's basically giving them a roadmap to wherever the nectar is, and it's a really nice sort of thing to see when they get all sort of agitated like that. That they really are showing everyone where the nectar source is. These guys are very quiet on the comb today. Still no sign of the queen, but then sometimes that's not unusual. She can be quite tricky to spot. Like I said, the queen that I know that's in here, certainly that was in here, is not marked. So she can be a little bit more tricky to find. But yes, they'll put a little dot on the back of the queen, like I was saying earlier, for the different years, so that you know how old the queen is, because oftentimes, I know a lot of beekeepers that will replace their queen every year. I tend not to do that. Certainly, if I've got one that's laying really well, there's no need to. But usually, after about 2 or 3 years, it's a good. A queen, the longest lifespan really for a queen is about 5 years. After that, her egg production really begins to slow down, and the bees will oftentimes want to replace her because she's not producing enough brood. So usually after 2 or 3 years, I'll end up replacing a queen anyway, which means, of course, that you have to find her, pull her out, destroy her, and introduce a new queen, which isn't as easy as it sounds. You don't just drop a new queen in there. I tried to introduce a new queen to a hive a little while ago, and they did not accept her, and they killed her. I saw them do it. They surround her, and they sting her to death. It was it was quite a sight to see. You really need to introduce them very slowly. The queen releases a pheromone that all the other bees get very used to, and when they sense that pheromone, they kind of feel everything's okay with the hive, and they'll spread that pheromone throughout the remainder of the hive, so that the other bees know that the queen is there, everything is fine, and that there aren't any issues. We've got a lot of bees hanging out here. I was just saying to Tyler earlier on, for many people, this is a great way to actually observe what's going on inside a beehive. And certainly, if they're fearful of bees, it's a great way to observe it and get real close without actually being here. So it's kind of a nice way to do it. I should point out as well, though, that bees, honeybees in particular, are not aggressive. They might be defensive, but they're certainly not aggressive. They won't go out of their way to sting you. They can only sting once. After that, they die. Unlike wasps and hornets, things like that, which tend to have a smooth stinger, which means that they can sting you repeatedly, which is not a good thing. Interestingly enough as well, wasps and hornets are carnivores, and honeybees are vegetarian. Take from that what you will. Well, there's plenty of uncapped brood here. Lots of it. What I'm looking for are these sort of tiny grains of rice type eggs. And if I see those, it means that the queen was at least there 3 days ago, if they're stood straight up. If they're laying down, it means that after three days, the eggs kind of fall over and they lay down. Obviously, that just means it's been a longer period of time. As I've gone further down into this hive, it would appear that it could very well be this hive that did indeed swarm. And that means if the queen has left, that one of these queen cells is going to be hatching fairly soon. I was fortunate enough actually at home the other day to see a queen being born, which is quite unusual. You don't often see that. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to see a queen emerging from her queen cell. It was very cool. She was quick, very fast across the comb. She moved like grease lightning. It was interesting to see. Once the queen emerges, generally speaking, she'll go around to all the other queens and kill them, because there can only be one queen per hive. So she'll go to the other queen cells or other emerging queens, and she will kill them to make sure that she is the only surviving queen there. I don't see her on this side. Usually when beekeepers are looking for the queen, many will say, if you want to find the queen quickly, take a child with you to the hive, because children seem to be able to spot them immediately. In fact, that happened to me at home. There's a family next door. Their little girl was over the fence looking at what I was doing. She said, "Can I have a look?" I'm like, "Yeah, okay, sure." I pulled the first frame out, and there was the queen. It was incredible. I don't know if it's ever happened to me before. It was so easy to find. So yeah, take a child with you to the hive, because they'll find the queen. Yeah, there's still no eggs in here, so but there is plenty of brood, which means it's a very healthy hive.
So typically, how many eggs would you see if there was a good indication that the queen was laying? Would you have seen eggs throughout all of the different layers?
Absolutely, very definitely, there would have been eggs everywhere throughout each one of these frames, because she'll lay them pretty much in any available cell space that she has. The frames toward the outside of each box usually tend to be for food, but uh, uh, depending on how much space they have, she will end up laying right to the very edge if she needs to. In this one, there's some bee bread. Actually, there's quite a bit of bee bread. So again, it's a healthy hive. There's lots of space here, but I do not see any eggs. It's kind of tricky because you have to try and look right down inside the cell. But yeah, there's no eggs there. So I would say that the queen here is gone, but they're raising a new queen, which is exactly what they should be doing. And so we're going to leave them to it. I'm guessing from Tyler's signal to me and from my own sense of time that we've probably got, what, about maybe 10 minutes or so left?
That's correct.
All right. So are there any questions? Any other questions that people have got? I'm more than happy. I will say, by the way, and I know a couple of people have reached out to me before, but on my next visit to the hives, if anybody would like to join me, and Tyler can attest to this, I have extra veils and jackets and gloves. So if anybody actually would like to join me and actually get an up close and personal visit with these, you'd be more than welcome to. Like I say, several people have taken up on it. Indeed, Chef Bob, who is very nervous around these, did a great job. He got in a couple of different hives with me and did a great job and had a great time. So Chef Bob can do it. You can too. And he did a great job. So really, you should feel very comfortable joining me. Just shoot me an email or shoot me a text. Many of you have my contact details. I really don't mind. Come on down and we'll check them out.
So if you were going to get started, where would you get your supplies, and what would be the kind of your basic setup, and what makes for good placement? Like if you were going to do it at your house, how far away would you want it to be from your house, and what kind of space would you want to set up?
No, good question. As far as online supplies, there's plenty of online supply houses out there. Blue Sky Bee Supply, which is an operation out of New York State, is actually pretty good. Things are reasonably priced, and they've got really knowledgeable staff that can help you with your selection. So Blue Sky is a great place to go. And then as far as placement, south siding placements are always really good. If it gets a little bit of dappled sunshine, so so only slightly partial shade. You don't want the hive to overheat, but dappled sunshine is always good, like we've got here. It's just kind of a nice location, and right behind where Tyler is stood, there are some shrubs. which means that the bees exiting here, as soon as they exit the hive, they have to fly up high. They don't take a direct route into people walking into the garden. They have to fly up and over these bushes, which actually makes it really good because they're up, they're up nice and high then, and out of people's way. You can have it really close to your house. It doesn't really matter. I mean, the three that I've got, one of them's only maybe about 20, 25 feet away from the house. If that, it's really, it's really quite close. Even if you live in a much more urban setting, you can still have, or rather, you can still live comfortably right alongside the bees. It's not a problem at all. So was there another part to your question? I can't remember. Or did I answer it?
I think that answered the question. If you were going to have more than one hives, would you try and separate them out? These two there are two that are right next to each other, but I know that the third one at that site is kind of across the garden. Is there a reason for that?
Well, actually, you know what? So another really good question. These two, it's okay if they are close to one another like this, but the entrance to this one is facing in this direction, and the other entrance is on the other side, so facing away. Because otherwise, you can tend to get some drift. That is, bees that will enter the wrong hive because they get a little bit confused sometimes. Now, if a bee comes back to the wrong hive and it's loaded with pollen or nectar, the other bees don't mind. They really don't mind admitting it because it's bringing in food. If it's coming in empty-handed, they get a little bit more fed up about that. But as far as being close together, that's not a problem. The only reason that one is across the way is that that's where that hive swarmed, and so we set it up to be across the way so that it was away from here, and we didn't get too much what they call drift happening. But no, generally speaking, you can set them up anywhere.
Great. And are there any warning signs to look for that something's going wrong in the hive?
Usually, lots. And if you get in there often enough, they'll be able to tell you, like the swarm cells that I saw on this one. It's always a good idea to make sure that you remove some of those, certainly, because they are signs that they can be swarming, and of course there's pests and things that you need to treat for throughout the year as well. You sometimes get parasites and pests in there, and so I'll be treating those in August.
Okay, so that sounds like you have like a cycle for when it's good to look for the things like pests that might get in there.
Just so, absolutely, yeah. Around August time is when I'll put a natural treatment on to take care of varroa mites, which have been linked with causing colony collapse. It's not the only thing, but certainly one of the things that you have to be aware of. And so I'll put a treatment on. I'll take honey off beforehand, and then I'll leave the rest of the honey on for the bees. Yeah, it's certainly things that you have to be very, very careful about and very cognizant.
And so you had talked about wrapping them for the winter. When do you unwrap them and in the springtime, and about what's the timing to wrap them up to get them ready for winter?
I'll unwrap them in the spring around about March or April time, when I know that there's not going to be too many more snowfalls, or I mean, you can still get significant frost, certainly, but around about April time, I'll unwrap them, and then I'll wrap them back up again around about November time. You sometimes get those odd days in November that are kind of warm, which is nice. You'll see bees flying, and so it's nice to be able to just get in there, clean things up a little bit, and then bed them down for the winter. So around about November time is when I'll wrap them.
And if you're going to extract the honey, is there a good time of year to do that?
I usually, well, there are a couple of times. I'll probably be taking some early honey in maybe around about June, and then maybe a little bit more in October, depending on how much they've collected. But again, you've just got to be careful about how much you take. I make sure that I leave on a hive this size. I'd leave at least 100 pounds in the hive to get them through the winter, which means that they've produced. I mean, you know, I probably took maybe of the 50 pounds we collected, I probably took about 30 pounds from this hive alone, and still left them with over 100 pounds.
Wow. Great. Does anybody else have any other questions that they wanna ask? Is there any other critical information somebody starting off would want to know before they got started?
Be prepared for it to take over your life. It's absolutely fascinating. Be prepared for the unexpected. I mean, you're dealing with, you know, wild creatures, and they're going to do their own thing. They're very much on their own agenda. You are just along for the ride. But have fun with it. Enjoy it. You know, if you are thinking about dipping your toe into the water of keeping bees, it's a great hobby to have. And you'll certainly learn a lot of stuff about the insects that are in your garden. And yeah, just enjoy it.
Great. All right. Does anybody have any other questions before we wrap up? We're just at about time. Somebody's asking whether there can be a video on collecting honey in June or whenever Chef Simon collects the honey. So we will do that. That will be a whole tutorial.
And you know what? If anybody wants to help with that as well, extracting the honey is great to have help with, and the cleanup is great to have help with as well.
Yeah. A sticky project.
Oh, for sure.
And then I know that there was some, the process for after you extract it, that is it spinning it? Is that what it's?
Yeah, once I pull the frames out and I take the cappings of the honey off, because they cap, well, once the honey is they've evaporated enough water, they'll cap each cell so that they can store it appropriately. When you uncap it, I then place it into a centrifuge, and that spins it. It spins out the honey. It's the most efficient way to do it. And the honey collects in a big barrel, and I then just I filter it. That is just I just strain it, because you know there might be the odd bit of bee in there that you might want to strain out, or a little bit of wax in there. So you strain that out and jar it. So it's a sticky process, certainly. It can be a little bit messy, but it's great to see how much honey you collect. And I mean, you collect a lot from just one hive. By the way, I just want to go back just very briefly. You mentioned about getting a hive. It's usually a good idea to start with 2 hives if you're going to do this at home, because then you've got something to compare against. You can see if one hive is doing well and the other one maybe isn't doing quite so well. You've got that comparison to make. If you've just got one hive, sometimes that can make it a little bit tricky. You're not quite sure what's going on. Whereas if you have 2, you really do have that comparison, and you can actually trade frames between the 2. If one hive is a little bit weak and it needs a little bit of bolster, it needs a bit of a boost, you can transfer frames back and forth. So it's a good idea to start with 2, even though that might seem kind of daunting.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing all of the knowledge about the hives and taking us through a tour of them.